if time went back, I wouldn't have voted for Iraq, because clearly there weren't any chemical weapons.
I left party politics because you realise the futility of it.
Right, good evening everyone.
It's not really an alliance with the United States, it remains slavish. People singing his name, oh, Jeremy Corbyn, and so on. Great moment, interesting moments in British politics.
في مطلع القرن العشرين وتحديداً في عام 1900 شكل الاسكتلندي كير هاردي مع رفاق دربه من نقابيين واشتراكيين ومثقفين آخرين حزباً سياسياً جديداً، حزب العمال البريطاني، الذي لطالما احتاجته بريطانيا وقتها للتعبير عن أصوات الطبقة العاملة بعدما كان صوتها قد طمس طويلاً. ليمسي الحزب كما أريد له أن يكون حزب جديد لقرن جديد.
The beginning of obviously the 20th century, Britain had been the first country to have an industrial revolution. The working class was very strong. It was becoming organised into trade unions. The trade union leaders had traditionally supported what had been the dominant party in the 19th century, the Liberal Party. But by the end of the 19th century, they felt that that party really wasn't giving them any benefit. And increasingly, they began to look towards the idea of independent labour representation.
It was mainly a trade union party, but with socialist ideals.
They chose the word labour, not socialist or social democrat as in Europe and elsewhere, because it was the trade unions who were the driving force in creating this party.
They won their first seats in 1906, and they first formed a majority government in 1945 at the end of the Second World War. Well, it was a great time for the Labour Party because everybody was expecting Churchill to be re-elected as Prime Minister after the war. But no, it was a Labour victory, and actually became the Prime Minister, and Churchill had to go and sit on the opposition benches.
The sweeping victories throughout the country mark an epoch in the political life of this country.
Apparently Stalin didn't believe that democracy was a real thing, and was astonished in his talks with the Western leaders, with Roosevelt and with Truman, etc., that Churchill wasn't re-elected. When they next had a meeting, it was Attlee who represented Great Britain.
حكومة جديدة فاجأت العالم يوم ذاك، أما في الداخل فقد كانت حالة أخرى من التجديد.
And it made a huge difference to the country, really, in terms of setting us on a course to have a welfare state, to have progressive taxation, and to have good public services.
And those were game-changing events. I mean, take just my own family. I mean, you know, I was the first in my family ever to go to university because it was free. My grandparents had lived in slum housing in Edinburgh. They moved to a council flat which had hot water and inside toilet. They never had that before. And of course, you had healthcare. In terms of foreign policy, it maintained the alliance between the United Kingdom and the United States as the Cold War developed. And then it went to war in Korea with the Americans. And what, apart from just the alliance of with the Americans and the effect that's had all the way down through the years to Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya and so on, it also meant that Britain, trying to preserve itself as a great power, committed itself to massive military spending, including the construction of an atomic bomb. And so Britain, economically, begins to fall behind. And that continues to this day. And of course, the alliance, well, it's not really an alliance with the United States. It remains slavish, in support of the United States. We describe it as like a poodle, a little dog running along behind.
كثيرة هي الأحزاب البريطانية، أحزاب عديدة في كل بلاد المملكة، يمينية، يسارية، قومية، ليبرالية واشتراكية. قد تترأس البرلمانات المفوضة، لكن هنا في هذا البرلمان، برلمان المملكة المتحدة، لا يصل إلى رأس السلطة سوى حزبين، وذلك منذ أكثر من 100 عام، إما حزب المحافظين اليميني أو حزب العمال اليساري.
The reason for this is the electoral system, the voting system. It's what's called first past the post, which means in parliaments where we are now, the party which gets the biggest percentage of votes wins. That's it. There's no redistribution of votes, there's no proportional representation. So that whole system means that the two big parties monopolise the Westminster system. And it's very difficult for a small party to break into that system. Sorry, that's the division bell, and it means there's a speaker, a new MP speaking.
نعم.
So it's going to happen again.
نحن في قلب البرلمان
You're in-
البريطاني. UK Parliament.
Yes, as I just said.
100 years ago, people accepted there were far fewer choices in life. But now everything, people express their individual preferences. They want to be able to vote for whichever party they want, and they want that party to have representation.
It's very hard to distinguish one set of policies from the other set of policies. And even politicians within that system are restricted on what they can vote for, what they can say, because they're controlled by their party. So we really don't have much democracy in this country when you realise how the system works.
بعد مدة دامت 18 عاماً من هيمنة حزب المحافظين على مفاصل السياسة البريطانية، تمكن حزب العمال أخيراً من الفوز في انتخابات برلمانية جديدة، ولكنه لم يتمكن من ذلك إلا بعد التغيير والتجديد. نيو ليبر تمثل في الشاب توني بلير الذي تزعم الحزب بعد وفاة زعيمه جون سميث عام 1994، والذي وبفضل انفتاحه ومواكبته العصر ترأس البرلمان البريطاني دورتين نما فيهما الاقتصاد والتعليم، انخفضت البطالة وكذلك الجرائم، وأقر نظام التصويت في دول المملكة. مرحلة مزدهرة حقاً، لكن كل ذلك كان قبل أن ينجر بلير ويقدم على كارثة ستضع اسمه على قوائم مجرمي الحروب عبر التاريخ.
We have been elected as New Labour and we will govern as New Labour.
That's when I was elected as a Member of Parliament. I remember the 1997 very clearly, the 1st of May 1997, and it was a great moment. And I think the Blair government did achieve an awful lot. We introduced a lot of changes in the way our democracy works.
Despite some things which he'd done well, for instance, the Good Friday Peace Agreement in Northern Ireland, which is a big success and to be welcomed, all of that was negated by his decision to go to war in Iraq in support of America, slavish support of America again.
Tony Blair should not be celebrated for any of his policies that he did domestically. This man is a war criminal that killed 1 million people in Iraq alongside the US. He might have done some things domestically, but if people want to consider themselves in any way against racism, and you see people here as equal to people outside of Britain, then this man killed 1 million Iraqis. I don't think there's much more that can be said about this man, and that he should have been tried for his war crimes against the people of Iraq, which he still has not to this date.
I mean, I could see that foreign interventions can go badly wrong if they can be good, they can be bad, and the one in Iraq was unusual in that there wasn't a war actually going on at the time, but there had been use of chemical weapons. Villages had been bombed with chemical weapons, and thousands had died. So, if you believe in disarmament of chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, there seems to be a good case for intervening.
Well, it was obvious that he was in trouble with the invasion of Iraq. He committed himself to this invasion. He committed himself to George W. Bush Jr. that they were going to carry through this invasion, and he was. But he began to run into more and more trouble in the build-up to the actual invasion, particularly the claim that Britain was 45 minutes away from being hit by missiles from Iraq, which just simply wasn't true. It was a lie. And as that lie was caught out, opposition to the war, not so much in Parliament, where New Labour, the vast majority of New Labour remained committed to Blair, and the Conservatives, of course, were supporting the war in Iraq, but on the streets, you began to see something very unusual in British society, which is huge demonstrations, culminating 2+ million in just on the eve of the invasion of the Iraq War. Later, when George W. Bush actually came to London, 500,000 during the week when people were working. So big demonstrations, very unusual in Britain, for people to take to the streets. Maybe in France that's normal, but not so much here. And it began obvious that really, even inside New Labour, opposition was beginning to surface. So the Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, resigned over this war, over the invasion. And really it was obvious that while Blair won another election, really New Labour had shot itself in the foot badly, electorally.
Looking back now, of course, we supported an American invasion, and it was a disaster. I think mainly caused by the way it was done and the fact that they didn't fill the vacuum afterwards that was created by the invasion, obviously they didn't find the chemical weapons that they believed that Saddam had. There was every reason to believe he would have them, but there wasn't, and we have to accept that means that the whole exercise was misconceived. But I'm not sure what conclusion you can draw from that. I mean, you could certainly say that countries tried international intervention. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it was disastrous.
And of course, the obvious disastrous consequences, the complete destabilization of Iraq, the horrible events we saw there, and so, Blair forever will be haunted. Anyone talks about Tony Blair, really Iraq is the word that follows. Tony Blair, Iraq.
War criminal! War criminal!
I think Tony Blair is a symptom of the imperialist Britain that we live in today, and I think that it is much more about our whole system, but this is the man who spearheaded it. So he was the one who initiated it, he was the one who was the face of it, essentially. But deep down we know that Britain has been complicit when it comes to Palestine, in colonizing Palestine. We issued the Balfour Declaration, from this country. We signed away the land of Palestine. We armed and trained the Zionist militia. We still host Israeli arms factories in this country. This country is complicit in the colonization of the Middle East and works alongside the US, Israel and other countries in order to continue this project in the Middle East. And this was another symptom of that same project of colonizing foreign countries. And often, sometimes people talk about in this country post-colonization as if it's over, but it is not over. If anything, it just changes and it manifests in different ways.
هدى عموري، عراقية الأم، فلسطينية الأب، مواطنة بريطانية بحكم الولادة والنشأة والحقوق والواجبات. أسست حركة Palestine Action، وهي حركة تهدف إلى تفكيك التعاون التجاري بين المملكة ودولة الاحتلال وإغلاق جميع مصانع الأسلحة الإسرائيلية في بريطانيا. سجن عدد من أعضائها وما زالت مستمرة تقاوم. لمؤسستها هدى تجارب غنية في الانكفاء ثم في المشاركة بالسياسة، فقد خاب أملها أكثر من مرة.
Growing up in this country, we used to struggle, my family, to have anyone to vote for. And then when Jeremy Corbyn came in, that's when things changed. And because he was someone who had championed the rights for the Palestinian people, he had spoke up on these issues, he opposed the Iraq war. It was an exception to the rule that we had seen for many, many years when it comes to people who have a possibility of becoming Prime Minister of this country.
Welcome, Jeremy Corbyn!
He was a friend, a good friend of mine. I didn't imagine he would ever become leader of the Labour Party, and I didn't really think it would be a good idea for him to become leader of the Labour Party because his views were very much on the left of the party. Every party has a spectrum of views. He was on the left. I admired him in many ways, but I didn't think he'd make a good leader.
I thought it was one of the most interesting moments in British politics. Here you had someone who just got on the ballot to become Labour leader, just. And then suddenly he's putting forward this socialist programme. And I think more importantly in some ways, he comes across as not being this identikit politician. Here's a man who's got an allotment, who grows his own fruit and vegetables. Suddenly he's just not like all the other politicians. And particularly for young people, not just young people, for many young people, they'd never come across this before. And they felt they could trust him. And he had a record, he'd opposed the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and so on. So you could see he wasn't just part of the crowd. And this huge influx, not just when he won the Labour leadership election because people voted for him, the membership voted for him, and then you had this huge influx of people joining the Labour Party across England and Wales because they regarded themselves as Corbynista. They were Corbyn supporters, and that had never happened. None of the mainstream party, the Conservative Labour, had been mass membership parties. They were under Jeremy Corbyn. And suddenly there was this debate, discussion inside the Labour Party, which no one had experienced before, this huge influx of members. And in fact, you may recall, he appeared at the Glastonbury Festival, this huge festival, to massive acclaim. People singing his name, oh, Jeremy Corbyn, and so on. Great moment, interesting moments in British politics.
Thank you very much.
It was something that we'd never seen before, a possible Prime Minister who actually stood up for the Palestinian people.
The expansion of illegal settlements and the imprisonment of Palestinian children are an outrage.
When he was supporting the Palestinian cause, associating with people who we wouldn't agree with, he believed that you should do that. But obviously there's a line that you need to draw about not talking to people who are actually currently engaged in wars, So I think it was a mistake to have him as leader, but I don't hold it against him personally.
Labour's manifesto is a manifesto for hope. That is what this document is.
But at the same time, it was in 2019, and it was the only time in history in this country that we saw on a party manifesto an arms embargo between Britain and Israel. It was on the manifesto, which meant it could become law if Labour were voted in. And that was the closest we got through the political process.
تقول الرواية إن مؤامرات كثيرة حدثت، مكائد ومصائب، أجندات ولوبيات عبثت بالحزب حتى تسببت بأكبر أزماته عبر التاريخ، أزمة معاداة السامية. تهمة وجهت إلى الحزب وسياسته، تهمة طالت حتى زعيمه جيرمي كوربن. هي أزمة صاغتها وأججتها عمالقة الإعلام البريطاني، أدت في نهاية المطاف إلى خسارة حزب العمال في انتخابات عام 2019 واستقالة كوربن.
What happened to him was appalling, really, because the media hounded him for all sorts of things, simply because they wanted to force him to stand down, and I think they were. Many things were said about him which were very unfair, untrue. I don't think that Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic. I think it's ridiculous to argue that he was or has been, I think it's just a shame what has happened.
Is it time to resign? Is it time to resign? Are you going to resign?
The Labour Party had shot itself in the foot by adopting a policy which essentially associated being against Israel with anti-Semitism. Now, they should never have accepted that premise. Many people, including Jewish people, who oppose what Israel is doing in Palestine are not anti-Semitic, but they oppose the Israeli government, Netanyahu and so on. But they accepted this privilege. So Corbyn is a strong supporter of the Palestinians. So there's an attempt to paint him as anti-Semite because of that record. And a very dodgy BBC programme, which since then has been actually revealed that it was telling lies about this.
I'm from Sky News.
From
Sky News.
Well, goodbye.
Mr. Corbyn, what are you going to do about the perceived anti-Semitism in your party?
And his opponents inside the Labour Party latch onto this, and it builds up a momentum. And of course, people in British society don't want to be associated with someone who's anti-Semitic. So people who just watch the TV programme or just read the newspapers or whatever, say, oh my goodness, this is terrible. Of course, it also enrages large sections of those people who support Corbyn. So when Corbyn's removed, many of them just simply left the Labour Party.
After the fall of Corbyn, I left party politics because you realise the futility of it, and that you're made to believe that you have a democracy in this country, but the reality is that I did everything possible, and so did hundreds of thousands of others, to create change through that process, and nothing changed. It only got worse. And when you realise that, then you have to try a different route than the political process.
الحزب اليساري الذي لطالما اعتبر أحد أهم أعمدة اليسار في العالم أمسى وبفعل أزماته الداخلية مسرحاً للتساؤل حول حقيقة قيمه ومبادئه.
Yeah, well, the Labour Party policy supports international law. It's against the existence of settlements, not only against the growth of settlements, but against their existence. And it's in favour of recognition of the state of Palestine. I would like it to adopt one or two other policies, such as an end to trade with settlement goods and stronger controls on arms exports to Israel.
Palestinians don't need Britain to recognise their country, which is being systematically destroyed by the Israeli state. We need sanctions on Israel in order to isolate them and stop them from continuing their ethnic cleansing project on the Palestinian people.
كغريمه السياسي الآخر، مثل حزب العمال جزءاً لا يتجزأ من المنظومة السياسية البريطانية التي لطالما تمنى كثر لو يبصرون التغيير داخلها، بل وصل بهم الأمر إلى الإيمان بيقين ذلك، إلا أنه كما يبدو وفي ظل النظام العالمي واللوبيات المتحكمة فيه قد يكون ذلك ضرباً من الخيال مهما اقترب من الواقع.